Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the recently released Madden NFL 20 and see how it compares visually to last year's Madden NFL 19. While there have been several changes to things like the user interface, rosters, and available options, the main focus of this video will be on specific visual elements, including character and object model complexity, environmental detail, texture quality, lighting, shadows, and sound. Bear in mind that both games are being played on the PC platform, with the graphical settings pushed as high as possible at a 1440p native resolution, but the observed changes between these two games are mostly shared across all platforms. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first taking a look at how various characters and object models have changed between games. Now right off the bat, you're going to notice that the coloration of this identical player has changed pretty drastically, despite the weather and lighting conditions of the background environment remaining identical between titles. This shift in lighting design has resulted in a slight reduction in the quality of our character models, which can be observed even more clearly when zooming in on the player's face. While most of the exact same water droplets and dirt particles remain in the same place between games, it's much more difficult to distinguish between them and the player's skin coloration. But this isn't just the lighting's fault. Upon even closer examination, it does appear like these particles aren't quite as geometrically complex, with droplets appearing like flat lines on the bridge of his nose. This seems like a fair compromise to visual fidelity, considering Madden 20 now features greatly improved anti-aliasing, making the edges of things like the helmet appear perfectly smooth. But there is a very odd bloom effect coming off of the edges now, that takes away a bit of the clarity, and it's difficult to tell if this is the reason why the aliasing appears less noticeable now. When observing other details like the player's arms and feet, very few differences can be found. The level of detail is still pretty incredible, with droplets of sweat and each individual skin cell being clearly visible. That's why it's even more surprising that the player's shoe model still looks so disappointing, with laces that appear very polygonal and don't appear to even be a part of the shoe itself. While the design of the shoe here has changed to coincide with the team's uniform, the actual model used appears to be identical, meaning they quite literally just changed the texture itself and nothing else. But now let's branch out a little further here and take a look at how the environments have changed, starting with the field. Three-dimensional grass sprites still populate the field, and from a good distance look great. Though just like the player model, the redesign of the game's lighting has noticeably altered the coloration, giving it a cooler color tone. This seems to also be the case with many of the props surrounding the field. Just like the character models, it appears that EA has directly copied over assets from the previous title, with only a few very minor improvements here and there. Things like this camera, for example, have not changed at all, and features the same low-resolution textures and low poly count. However, I did notice that a few of the character models like the cameraman and coaches have seen some very nice improvements. The character models now feature more advanced textures, shaders, and greatly increased polygon counts, making them more closely aligned with the high-quality player models. They're not necessarily amazing, and they seem to by default have their eyes wide open, which is a bit off-putting, but considering how frequently these characters appear in the background of highlights and replays during matches, I think this was a smart improvement. An even more surprising change is how the crowds have been altered. Despite an identical game with the same teams on both sides, weather, and time of day, these crowds behave entirely different. Crowds in Madden 19 hold up various signs and jump up and down to cheer for their team, but the fans in Madden 20 don't seem nearly as enthusiastic. There's no signs to be found anywhere, and the animation variety has been reduced to only include a few characters throwing an arm up to cheer now and again. As I've already mentioned before, Madden 20 does feature a slight tweak to the environmental lighting. While the lighting still exhibits the same decent volumetric light and God rays on display in Madden 19, the coloration of each scene appears to have a tiny bit more contrast and slightly higher brightness, resulting in a more colorful image. Details aren't as defined now, and the grass coloration doesn't appear quite as natural as it did before. This can obviously be adjusted manually using in-game settings and your own TV settings, but it's still an odd change. Reflections, on the other hand, do appear much clearer than in Madden 19, especially when viewing players' helmets up close. More detail is distinguishable now, giving the overall image a much more believable presentation. Shadow quality is also more or less the same here, though there really isn't much more that can be done, as shadows in Madden 19 were already excellent, with realistic soft edging and believable proportions relative to the light source and model distance. Next, let's take a brief look at effects, mainly how weather is handled between both games. I was actually pretty surprised by Madden 19's portrayal of rain, as it's almost impossible to make out any actual raindrops during gameplay, aside from some droplets landing on the camera lens. The field doesn't even appear wet with splashes or anything, And the only other indication that there is inclement weather is the darker atmosphere and different shaders used on the player uniforms. Madden 20 seems to address this very well though, and introduces both light and normal rain options in the menus, with the normal rain being clearly visible from all angles, and the character's feet causing splash sprites to emit from the field. Snow, on the other hand, seems to be exactly the same between games, with some pretty low resolution snow effects dropped onto the field and the three-dimensional grass not necessarily reacting very well to it. However, if you look to the sidelines, Madden 20 now features big piles of snow, whereas Madden 19 previously just had a flat layer. Other than that, the snow is exactly the same, and players still leave footprints on the field, which seems to take a while to fade away. Finally, let's wrap up with a short sound comparison. Which game do you think has the better overall sound design?
What's up? White 20! White 10!
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Madden 20 offers a few very minor improvements over its predecessor. The improvements to anti-aliasing really help to clean up the previously jagged image presentation, and the upgraded sideline character models are a great touch. I'm not quite sure why the lighting was changed, as it still, for the most part, seems to function about the same, but it's hard to really say it looks better or worse. But what do you guys think? Is Madden 20 enough of a visual upgrade? What elements do you wish were improved upon more? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.